One of the things that happens to us mere humans is that when we think about ourselves, we often think about that part of us that we don't admire, that we don't like, or that we think other people don't find admirable or likable. That's part of our nature. We tend to remember from our childhood things that were said that were negative rather than things that were said that were complimentary, particularly by people who mattered in our lives, especially our parents and our siblings and maybe significant teachers and coaches. But what about our own dialogue with ourselves? Do we look back at things that we did and ask ourselves if they live in the past or if they're continuing to live in our present? Think about the distinction between guilt and shame. So guilt says, I'm human, I did something wrong, and it gives me an opportunity to create even greater closeness with that person or people whom I've harmed and with myself. But shame is something very different, and I think what often happens is we plaster ourselves with shame, which is confining and constricting, rather than with guilt, which is ultimately liberating. Guilt is what pulls your hand off the stove when it's hot. It says, don't do that, that hurts other people or yourself. But shame ultimately is what perpetuates the idea that you belong in that kind of pain, that you should keep your hand burning on that stove because ultimately you're not worth more than that. Shame, if guilt, I should say, is the idea that I did bad, then it's healthy and a good realization. But shame, its insidious, ugly partner, says I am bad, and it's impossible or virtually impossible to escape that feeling without the help of perhaps a very good psychologist who will take a long time to unravel that story and to reshape a person's concept of themselves. So one thing I want to say to you is your self-thoughts, your conversation with yourself obviously matters, and it might be even more voluminous, more apparent, more louder than it has been in the past. Because right now you might have more time for your own thoughts. You might be in silence and drowning out your own thoughts with a television, with radio, with other noises. And when you ultimately come to yourself, ask yourself if you're better than your own review that you're giving yourself that day. If you can allow the past to live in the past, to be part of what taught you and grew you, what enabled you to be the kind of person that you are and that you're in the progress of striving to become. So guilt is, I did bad, and that can be corrected, and that can actually create even greater closeness. Think about that beautiful story, that idea, teaching of a rope that's broken. It's obviously an awful condition. It isn't helping anyone. But when we create a knot in it, pulling the two pieces together and creating a knot, that knot becomes the strongest part of the rope. It's not my teaching. It's a beautiful Jewish Hasidic teaching, but one that I think is relevant and might remind us of what we actually can do to change today and tomorrow for the better.